It's not bad. We caught up. So we have the 2022 Water Summit, the dire story that Snowpack tells us. Presenter is Lisa Hartman, Associate Deputy Mayor, and Robert Thompson. What does PG stand for? Is it a title?
Professionally licensed geologist.
Professionally licensed geologist. Okay, I learned something new today. Salt Lake County Flood Control and Engineering. Thank you so much for coming. I'll turn the time over to Lisa.
Thanks, Madam Chair. As you know, this is a water summit. It's going to be a 4-part series. Today, starting off with the Snowpack report of Salt Lake County. We know, both from the council and from the mayor, that water and water conservation continues to be an important subject that we are all on board with dealing with in the coming months and the coming years. And so we felt like it was timely to provide just some information on those various subjects dealing with water and water conservation in the next 4 weeks. And we hope that after the summit, we will be bringing you some additional policy suggestions based upon some of the things that we'll be presenting to you in the coming weeks. Mayor, I don't know if you want to add a little something to that.
Well, yeah, I am so excited today to kick this off, this 2022 Water Summit. And it's clear we all need to do more. Here at Salt Lake County, we did quite a bit last year with our initial goal of 5% reduction. We've now measured and we are at 13%. So we far exceeded our goal, and we know as we go into another dry year that our work in the future is all the more important. So I want to thank Lisa, the full team, for prioritizing this. Jordan has done a ton of work. Their public relations lead, communications lead on this as well. The entire team has done great work to pull this together for you. And our hope is that when we conclude in 4 weeks, that we can have learned some things and even be clear with the public and with our employees and our venues about next steps. So we appreciate your engagement on this, your questions, and thank you to the team for kicking us off today.
All right, so we're going to have Bob jump in, our watershed manager, on the Snowpack report, and then we're going to just quickly go through the 2021 of our 5%, our 5% goal of last year, and then open it up for questions, if that's okay. All right.
Yeah, so I think the mayor's synopsis was a good one to start with. It's a dry year. If we can go to the first slide. This is the slide that shows us our water year to date. So the water year begins on October 1st and continues through September 30th. And you may all recall we had a wonderful October with lots of rain and snow and wonderful weather that we love in Watershed. And then November was the opposite. It was incredibly dry, incredibly warm, and we've seen kind of the same pattern. So December was, again, really wet, and January, February were horribly dry. March has worked out to be a very average month. So if we go to the next slide. Actually below average. It's one of the wetter months that we can usually expect some pretty reliable precipitation. We really expected this March to bolster the snowpack, and instead we have not done much to bolster the snowpack. So next slide. When we look at temperature outlooks, I think it's important to look at these things both regionally and on a very local scale. Regionally, it looks like we're looking specifically for March for approximately normal temperatures, maybe a little below average, and March did turn out to be that way. Unfortunately, these are only updated once a month, so I can't give you the numbers for April yet, but next slide. The seasonal temperature outlook does not look favorable. So this was issued near mid-March, and it's what the forecast is for April, May, and June. Those are normally, again, very wet months that we can usually rely on a lot of precipitation, but if we have temperatures that are significantly above average, that does not fare well for the snowpack. Next slide. Precipitation outlook. For March, it was about average, and we did see it about average month, slightly below average, but it wasn't as bad as some of the months we've seen in the past. And if we go to the next slide, this is the one that really concerns me. When we look at our seasonal precipitation outlook, April, May, June, again, usually very wet months, and the forecast right now is to be significantly below average. So if you compound the significantly below average precipitation regionally with above average temperatures, that doesn't bode well for a regional forecast for water availability. So this is where some of the alarm is coming from. Next slide. And this is the state of our current snowpack. So we're starting to get a little bit more focused. This shows individual numbers for specific watersheds in and around the Intermountain West. If you look to that little orange dot, the 66, that's the lower Jordan Basin. That's where we are. So we're a little more than half of what our average snowpack is, which is not great. Next slide. So looking at this in more of a graphical form, in the Jordan Basin, the black line represents our snowpack to date. So starting at the beginning of the water year on October 1st, we did get a significant amount in October. We got a great December series of storms, and then again, February and January were really dry. And we just had a really warm weekend, and that dive on the black line is from this melt that happened this last weekend. So that was a significant amount of snow that the Jordan River Basin lost. And I put the orange line, which is the 2021 water year, on there just as reference, because last year was a pretty dreadful snow year. And you can see we're significantly below where we were last year. Next slide. I like to look at really specific sites. This one's located at Brighton. It is a west-facing site, so I don't put a lot of stock in this one, but you can see that melting event we had last weekend was pretty significant, and we are significantly below where we were last year. And next slide. This is the snowpack site that I really focus my attention on. This is a pretty high elevation site at Snowbird. It's north-facing, and that really that's the aspect that really delivers a lot of our water. So I spent some time looking at this site. As you can see, we are well below the average line, which is the green line. We're below where we were last year. So this is a pretty good indicator that our snowpack is not in great shape right now. Without a wetter and cooler spring, we probably shouldn't expect that black line to do much in the way of rising. The forecast is not telling us that that's going to happen. So next slide. This is an interesting graph that I also spent a lot of time looking at. This is the soil saturation in our region, and this is one of the reasons why we were upgraded from a D4 drought, I guess downgraded from a D4 drought into a D2 drought. D2 drought is only considered a severe drought, whereas D4 was considered an exceptional drought, and that's where we ended last water year. We did have that really wet October, which drove the soil saturation sky high, in fact, higher than it's ever been. And it stayed there for much of the winter. It had been coming down until this last weekend, and with all of that melt happening, it drove the soil saturation way up, which at face value seems like it's a good thing. But if you melt the snowpack too early, more of that snowpack is going to escape into those soils, so we can further saturate those soils. But that means that water is not available for the reservoirs. We really need to get it into the streams for it to flow downhill and into reservoirs. And also, from a flood control perspective, I do wear that hat as well. We worry when the soils get too saturated, because then the water can become a little bit more oriented towards surface runoff. And even in a really poor water year like this, we can be looking possibly at flooding scenarios if you have the wrong melt cycle happen. So it's not the best case scenario any way you slice it. So let's go to the next slide. And again, wearing the watershed hat, this looks kind of dreadful, but wearing the flood control hat, it looks pretty good. We have lots of places to put water, but there's not a lot out there. So our reservoir storage is, well, with the exception of Deer Creek, it's looking pretty bleak. And our largest reservoir, next slide, Utah Lake is hovering right around 60% full. So this is kind of the graph that shows you the daily fluctuations of that lake. And to change from 60% full to a full pond, that's a lot of water. It would take an amazing amount of water to fill this lake up to compromise level, and I just don't see that happening this water year. Next slide. So where we stand in the western United States, we have been downgraded to a D2 drought, but when you consider the long-term regional forecast, both with respect to temperature and precipitation, and then you look at where our snowpack currently stands, there's probably a fair chance that this will be upgraded early in the summer season. There's probably just not going to be much water available to, well, to be available. I guess that's the key term. So this is kind of a bleak scenario. And next slide. It's expected to continue. So that's the end of my presentation. And I think hopefully Lisa has some wonderful numbers to give us some hope after that.
Yes. Do you mind pulling up the water conservation report? So as you know, last year, Mayor Wilson asked all of our agencies to shoot for a 5% reduction or more. And we are obviously glad to say that it is at 13%, which is, considering most of our water footprint, over 75% belongs to our Parks and Recs area. That is no small feat in terms of what we asked, what the mayor asked of our agencies, and what our agencies delivered. With that, we also challenged the residents to do the same with the hashtag line, do a little, save a lot. And again, a lot of times when we're looking at water conservation, I think that's where it gets to be overwhelming. When we start talking about drastic things to do, it's actually starting small and the cumulative effect of all of us working together to reduce that water footprint. We also launched the Salt Lake County H2O website, which is still up, and that is going to continue to be up and share so that residents can go back and watch the presentations on the Water Summit, and also kind of keep track of what we're doing in terms of water and water conservation in the future. I would also like to just say, when I say the 13%, that was 33 million gallons, and that's 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So that's pretty impressive. And I want to turn it over to Michael to kind of just talk about what we'll be asking our agencies to do continuing forward.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So yeah, I'm going to kind of give a sort of long-term, larger picture, and it's one of those good news, bad news. The good news is that by the direction of the mayor and all the different agencies, we really have done a tremendous job at kind of finding the low-hanging fruit, areas that without too much pain we can cut water use, and that has obviously led to some tremendous savings, which is no small feat. The bad news is that, as Bob said, we are looking at kind of long-term drought scenarios, which means we can only trim the fat so far before we have to really start looking fundamentally kind of at systems themselves and how to long-term plan for water conservation within county operations. And so over the next few weeks, we are going to be looking at different policies and different proposals and different projects to do exactly that. And that's something we will be bringing to the council to discuss and talk about. But it's something that we're going to have to fundamentally start looking at is how to save water in the longer term, because this problem, unfortunately, is not going away. But in the short term, things we're continue to looking at is we're asking agencies to hold off watering until May 15th, continue to water 1 day less during the week, monitor and adjust sprinklers, and make sure that the parking lots are clean so they don't consolidate water. We're also asking Salt Lake County residents to reduce their water use by 5%. And if we can get 25% of residents to reduce their water by just 5%, that is a tremendous amount of water saved. It would actually help restock some of the reservoirs. That's actually moving the needle. And we will continually look at policies that we can help work with the public to help encourage water saving. But it's not, obviously this isn't just a Salt Lake County problem. The state's looking at it, the feds are looking at it, water districts are looking at it, and really there's no silver bullet. There's not one individual entity that can solve our water issues. And so it's going to take everybody doing their part, and I think we've got off to a great start, and we look forward to proposing ways we're going to continue to improve.
And so I would just add, on the waiting to water until May 15th, some of our agencies were able to wait until well into June in terms of watering, which was a positive. What we do know is that April and May are excessive water waste. A lot of people are watering a lot of days of the week, and it's just not necessary. They can wait, and actually your lawn actually is just like us. We can work it out. If you go and work out, you build more stamina, and the same applies to your lawn as well. And I just wanted to mention that we are continuing with the same practices that we did for last year, but we're asking them to do to audit and get more fine-tuned in what they're doing, but we're not asking more than that, because we feel like right now that's the good balance on that, and there's several other areas where we think there's some bigger water savings to come, and we'll be sharing that with you over the following weeks. Do you guys have any questions? I'm sure probably more for Bob.
Any questions from council?
I do.
Okay, let's go to D, and then we'll go to,
So that's great. It's good to see that we're having a reduction in water, but what are some of the ways that we're doing that? What are we doing at the county to reduce our footprint?
So the outside water use is for the entire county. That accounts for over 75% of most water use in the entire county. So those 5 things that we just previously mentioned, we're continuing those practices going forward.
Okay.
We were able to save 13%, but again, I have to defer to Bob here. We don't know what the next months are going to look like. So it's hard to say that we'll definitely stay where we were for the 5%, but it's hard to say if we'll be at 13% come next year, because we just don't know what the precipitation is going to be like, just what the summer holds for us. So it's very hard to put beyond that. And we always felt like 5% was a goal that was going to be hard for some of our agencies, but one that we thought was a positive one and worth doing. And I forgot to mention earlier, we did have signs out at all of our facilities, and that sets the expectation of when guests come to our facilities, they know that we are practicing water conservation. So if they do see some dryness in the grass or whatever, for the most part, people are wanting to be a part of the solution. And we've also changed those signs this year to where they will be bilingual, Spanish and English.
And Parks and Rec receives a drastic reduction in complaints about the state of the lawn when those signs are up. They've noticed that when people realize that we're trying to make a difference internally, we think that's a big help and really keeps the complaints down.
And council member, I would just add one other thing. Most all of our new facilities that we're building, we're doing low flow toilets. We're doing everything that we can inside. It's really that outdoor water use where we have the biggest option to make the most impact on our water footprint.
Okay.
right, Councilmember Fry.
Yeah, thank you for that information. It's so vital, I think, water, like air, we all need it, right?
Yep.
And it's a resource that we all need as human beings. And my mind shifts to 2 things. First is the Riverton City green well that's going to save us a lot of money and upgrade the water for Riverton and for our Riverbend golf course. And then it goes to our golf courses. I'm interested countywide the kind of how thirsty are I'm thinking they're pretty thirsty, right, in the summertime. And what are we doing to mitigate the water consumption for our golf courses?
So as you know, they are quite a significant investment, and they are enterprise funds, so they have to make money to survive. So we've asked our other agencies to step up and do more where they can. And in the areas that the golf course can not water less or not water at all, they are doing that during the summer months, but keeping the greens and the fairways watered is absolutely necessary for the, going forward for the use of those.
Yeah, they just
golf
can't dry
courses.
up, I understand, but I just
And
wonder if there's
and
mitigating
yes, Yep.
factors
So
going on.
they are doing where they can. It's not just a solid, they're not part of this. They
Sure.
are doing their part to participate in that. And I think they've been a good partner as well as we go through that. And like I said earlier, our hope is that in looking at some of these other policies, we can make some big water footprint impacts before we have to go to that discussion of the golf courses and asking them to do further.
Yeah, that's excellent. And then more of a commentary, I know that in our canyons, we protect our watershed, you know, to the extreme because it is so important with the officers up there, and I think that's a good thing. But my mind shifted last year. I remember listening to Michael Phelps, the greatest swimmer that's ever been, right? The Olympian, and he did a piece on one of the shows, and he is on a worldwide water conservation crusade. I don't know if anybody saw that, but and he talked about training his own children. When you brush your teeth, you know, do you have to let the water keep running, turn it off? And he just talked about how crucial the water was for human life and how we need to protect and preserve it. And it cuts across all barriers. And you think of the people in different continents and countries that don't have clean water and how, you know, what that brings as well. So I applaud you for this, and I think we should all get behind it and do what we can for the greatest good of everybody and protecting our water and so on. So I just want to thank you for that.
Well, and I would just add on that, council member, one of the things that we've been talking about in our team that meets on this is, I think the conversation has changed as well. Even if we weren't in a drought, I think we're more conscious of preserving water for future generations, drought or not. So I think all the things that we've asked our agencies to do are good practices going forward, and why we feel comfortable with continuing that on. And I would also add, in addition, we are also going to have Parks and Rec share in the coming weeks a couple of the unique ways that they are doing watering different and conserving water in different ways that I'm not sure that all the council has heard about before. So we are doing some exciting things as well.
Yeah, and my last comment, I like to see all the meteorologists, whatever station you listen to, jumping on board as well about protecting water and the pack and what we can do, and because it is crucial. It's an important issue. So thank you.
And if you don't mind, could I just add a little bit to what Lisa said? So this idea of active spaces, whether it's a golf course or a park, there are a lot of active spaces where kids are wanting to kick soccer balls, or people are wanting to, you know, as pointed out, swing the golf club. Those spaces, I think we're going to be more liberal in terms of our allowance, but passive spaces in any of our parks and rec facilities or any land that we own don't necessarily need the amount of water. So we've done, my direction is to assess whether you're a park or a golf course or any other building, is there a reason for that Kentucky bluegrass? And kids kicking soccer balls, even in July, is still an active and important use. It's the area around there that we would ask them to reduce even further. That's not to say we might have overwatered a little over the years in some of these active spaces, but we recognize there's another value, and that is, you know, to the very reason that we've had these rec centers and parks and golf courses, and that's active play, and sometimes green grass is really what's needed.
Yeah, and just commentary on that too. My grandchildren use the J.L. Sorensen and Harriman extensively, and last year and the year before that specifically, I remember going out there and it was a slough. I mean, there was so much water you would sink down in the grass sometimes, and mosquitoes, and there was issues. So we need to really watch that to make sure that we're policing our own you know, amenities
Yes.
without having that happen, because I have firsthand knowledge of that, and it wasn't just a one-time event. It went throughout the whole summer.
Yeah, and we're sure you're right, and council, we're working on our own inventory and know that month after month we're making progress. So if you see those situations, please share, where we will address it and work with the facility manager to make the change.
Thank you.
Okay, any other? Yes,
Yeah,
Jim.
I just had a question, and you probably are best suited to answer it. Is there any relationship to conservation strategies and the water in the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Because, you might think if I wash my driveway off, that's wastewater going to the Great Salt Lake, which probably isn't necessarily a good idea, but anyway.
Yeah, it's still a really good idea to conserve. So. Yes, all of the water that we use in the valley does eventually end up in the Great Salt Lake. We're an internal drainage basin, and water in the Great Salt Lake has great value, so that's not to be overshadowed, but the water that we have in the Great Salt Lake is not necessarily the best water for any other use other than being in the Great Salt Lake.
But, so, conservation strategies in theory would help. Conservation strategies would necessarily affect the level of the lake? Probably not, but I don't know.
I mean, it would take a pretty significant conservation action to really affect the water level in the lake.
Yeah, Councilman, the Great Salt Lake. I mean, we, like I mentioned before, we are but one of many different, organizations that are trying to conserve, and the Great Salt Lake is such a big problem, the drying of the Great Salt Lake, and really that's why it's so important that each different entity does its part, and then looking at kind of those larger systemic changes. The Great Salt Lake is a systemic change. Something really needs to change for us to keep it from drying up.
And Laura Vernon is going to be coming on April 26th to talk about the Great Salt Lake in more detail. Yep.
Go ahead, Dee.
So how are we getting the word out to residents to kind of do this? Do we have a campaign of some sort that's being launched, or just people going to our website, or what's? Are they
We
doing?
are putting it on our social media, both
Okay.
on the county, the mayor's, and Office of Regional Development and we're also doing Water Wednesdays, which we did last year, sharing our tips on Wednesday for residents to replicate at home. And we will also be sharing from our presentations each week, parts of the presentation that the residents can also take part in.
Okay. And is there any talk of some kind of enforcement as far as people who are heavy violators with water and, who are watering the roads instead of their yards and things of that nature?
Well, we're not a water supplier, so we weigh into the conversation. We don't really are not in a position to actually do that. That would be up to the water suppliers that are sending it out and the municipalities that are in those areas to do that.
Okay.
It would be great, but I think part of the water conservation that we've asked with the ARPA dollars is starting that conversation with our municipalities, and I think that starting that conversation and us collaborating together is a good opportunity to have those conversations with the municipalities that could actually put those in place going forward.
Okay. And then is there a watershed board, or is that something that I dreamed up, or is that an actual thing, or was there at one point?
For the Jordan River watershed? Or?
Just for Salt Lake County in general.
We don't necessarily have a board.
Okay.
We participate in the Jordan River Commission.
Okay.
And it acts similarly to what a watershed board would do.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one quick comment.
Go ahead.
The Tribune, remember several years ago, used to publish each year the 10 top water users, and they got it from their bill. Carl Malone made the #1 position all 10 years, but they were a little miffed. People were a little miffed that first to see when you get an $18,000 water bill for a month of the summer, something weird's going on.
Yes.
Yeah, none of us want to be on that list.
Well, and that's a good point. Is that's all about kind of identifying that semi low hanging fruit. Is if you were look at a graph of water users, there is certainly a small percentage of users that are using a extremely outsized portion. Yeah, yeah, and so that's something we're working with the water districts on, and there's various ways you can go after that, whether it be tiered water rates or enforcement. But yeah, no, it's definitely a problem because you have people that have jungles in their backyards, and
Well, and council member, that just leads me to another thought on the secondary metering. Just seeing what your usage is usually leads to about a 30% drop in how much water you are using. So just like you said, getting that bill and knowing how much you're using in comparison to everyone else is a big step towards just making a big jump to begin with.
One more quick question, if I may. No, never mind.
Okay.
Move on.
Okay. Thank you for your time, and
All
we'll
right.
see you in a couple
Thank you
weeks.
so much. Appreciate
thank
it.
you.